Okay, we're ready to start our story. We left off with Elder Haskell on his way to Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Remember, he was president of more than one conference at a time, and he traveled back and forth. He was a man, like Pastor mentioned, the title is Man of Action, and he was on his way doing business for the church. And now we pick up. During 1874, a monthly journal, The True Missionary, was published. After 1 year of publication, The True Missionary was merged with Review and Herald. It contained reports and letters from individuals, gave helpful instruction to the societies, and related experiences illustrating various methods of approach and the results attained. The paper announced that the Vigilant Missionary Society's chief objective was the promoting of pure religion through visiting and praying with families, distributing and mailing tracts and papers and missionary correspondence. In its pages, Haskell wrote of the good to be accomplished by placing our health and religious journals and best bound books in college reading rooms and public libraries throughout the country, which would raise the standard of truth and in every town and city. Other duties were enumerated, such as writing to absent members, caring for the worthy poor, and finding homes for orphan children. Both district and conference quarterly meetings of the tract and missionary societies were to be held. These were weekend gatherings to acquaint all with the constitution and rules of the organization, to select officers and outline their duties, to bring in financial and statistical reports, and most important, to pray and counsel together and exchange experiences. Haskell was a strong believer in reporting. He maintained that a good reporting system tends to unify action with by enabling the various societies to work in close collaboration with one another. He believed that the recounting of battles fought and victories won would stimulate sister societies and members to persevere in the work. As an added benefit, he wrote, "A visiting spirit, which is so much needed, will be encouraged, not to chit-chat upon nothing in particular, but to inquire after one another's spiritual welfare." From time to time, reports appeared in the journal, missionary letters were printed, suitable programs were suggested, and important matters to be dealt with at the quarterly meetings were presented. Responsible leaders were installed, and their numerous duties outlined, among which were the rather large assignment of seeing that every member had an interest in every department of the work. Each society had its president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and corresponding agents. These agents distributed literature and contributed names of interested persons who might desire to read further on some particular subject. The plan was effective, if somewhat intricate, as Mrs. White commented in a letter to Haskell. A person in a distant country, on receiving a journal from nobody knew where, and often in an unfamiliar language, would, From mere curiosity, if nothing else, seek out someone who could read and interpret it for him. Thus, new centers of interest and fresh opportunities for correspondence were constantly being created. In time, the societies had members acting as corresponding agents in many parts of the world. Haskell's inspirational articles were sprinkled with his favorite slogans of courage and faith, such as these written in 1874 in the one volume of the short-lived The True Missionary. Quote, "Facts, experience, and the Word of God justify our believing that success will attend every judicious effort to spread the truth." Quote, "It is when sacrifices that cost something are called for that the heart is tested." Another quote, "We should ask for great things and expect them." And another, "God is at work, and work as fast as we may, his providence will keep us ahead of us." Another, "The times call for action. We have something else to attend to besides our farms and merchandise." Another, "The efforts we have made are only a little field drill, testing the strength of our system and learning how we can work together. Soon we shall be called upon to do something besides skirmish and drill." Another, "Love is an active principle and cannot live without works. The soil in which it grows is not the natural heart, but love is a heavenly plant, and flourishes only in a heart renewed by the grace of God." In an effort to boost the courage of his fellow workers, he bade them take a backward look, to go back about 25 years earlier, when the whole edition of our publications, printed every 2 weeks, was carried to the post office in a carpet bag, whereas now, in 1 week, 7 cartloads of reading material, allowing 30 bushels to a cartload, were sent from the publishing house at Battle Creek to different parts of the world. In October 1874, Elder Haskell presented in The True Missionary a report of the tract and missionary societies covering the 4 years since their first unit was organized in New England. A rather complete report it was, for those days when statistical records were scarce, for the early workers seemed to have been too busy making history to spend much time recording it. The report includes 15,000 subscriptions obtained for our periodicals, which was estimated at 260,000 visits of the review and 60,000 visits of the instructor and health reformer, between 3 and 4 million pages of reading matter distributed, mostly free. And we struggle to get a 24-page paper out once a month. But here they are, working hard, several people working. Thousands of our books placed in public libraries, nearly 10,000 families visited and prayed with, in an impressive report. Coming from only 1,800 reporting members in 7 state conferences. He further stated that 10 new cotton churches, or tents, were then operated successfully west of Michigan. And at all the camp meetings that season, he had calls for publications in German, French, Swedish, and Danish. The report closed with an appeal for deeper consecration, 2 years later, Elder Haskell was able to report that the fruits of visiting from house to house were being seen in different parts of the country where individuals and small companies were embracing the message. Haskell was a man of courage, endurance, and unbounded optimism. Neither weariness nor pain, bad roads nor poor transportation facilities, summer heat nor winter wind and snow, nothing dampened his spirits or abated his efforts. His persistent endeavors to meet all appointments, even under the most adverse conditions, were contagious. He wrote that at meetings where he expected only a small attendance or none at all, the brethren came in from different places, traveling all the way from 10 to 35 miles. He tells of one brother who walked 25 miles so that his family might ride. While he was visiting in New York State in January of 1876, when it was neither sleighing nor wheeling, one brother living 50 miles away started for the meeting on a stone boat or a heavy sled used on the farm. He came 25 miles, where he obtained a wagon and brought another brother with him. Then he returned home and brought his family to Randolph, a distance of 25 miles, where another meeting was held. 25 miles was quite a journey. Without automobiles and along unpaved country roads where horses' feet and wagon wheels would sometimes sink deep into the mud. The missionary chief was prompted to report encouraging experiences through the pages of the Review as a means of stirring others to action. He wrote about one sister who gave a few tracts and copies of The Signs of the Times to a man traveling to Washington, D.C. Some months afterward, she received a letter from a Sunday school teacher who had begun to keep the Sabbath. The writer said that she had been troubled because she could not harmonize the Word of God with the views taught by her pastor. The man who had received the Adventist literature was attending her Sunday school class, and he was able to answer some of her questions to her satisfaction. He had found the answers in the papers handed him by the Adventist sister and had passed them on to his Sunday school teacher, and she read them, then gave them to her neighbors. This resulted in 13 converts. Haskell was elected president of the General Tract and Missionary Society in 1876. There were difficulties which might have discouraged a leader possessed of less cheerful perseverance. In some churches, he found the early enthusiasm of its members dead or dying. Much earnest work was required to arouse them to feel their responsibility. If he was prevented by other appointments from remaining with a certain church long enough to accomplish his purpose, he would arrange to return later. He might plan a field day of house-to-house visitation and follow it with an hour or two of consultation with the workers, reviewing the experiences of the day, answering their questions, and giving instruction as to the best methods of approach. Nor would he give up until the entire church was at work again. Some societies became discouraged because they had fallen behind in their payments for publications. With characteristic energy, Haskell then launched into the task of soliciting contributions, squaring up old accounts, and establishing a new literature fund with which to carry on a strictly cash business with the office. Otherwise, how could the Review and the Signs publishing houses continue operating? The members usually saw the point and were willing to sacrifice to raise the funds required. At Elder Haskell's, as his work increased rapidly in the central states, he decided to move his house, rather his home. This was easily done. It simply meant moving Mary, for he always said, "Home is wherever Mary is." So he brought her to Battle Creek and arranged for her to board as with an Adventist family, the Chinnocks. He would be happier there because she could see him more often, and he would be spared anxiety over her possible loneliness. Mary Haskell was glad to be relieved of the uphill work of cooking. She spoke of Mary Chinnock as one of the best of cooks. And lest someone misjudge Mrs. Haskell, it might be mentioned that nearly a century ago, cooking with its attendant housekeeping was uphill work. Electric stoves, refrigerators, and modern heating and cooling systems were unknown. Baking was done in the oven of an iron cook stove, which must be stoked from a wood box or coal hod. The bread, cake, pie, or roast constantly watched, and dampers manipulated to preserve even temperatures. Perishable foods were usually kept in a cool cellar underneath the house, and when needed must be carried up a narrow flight of stairs to the living arrangements or apartments. There were few prepared foods, and of course nothing frozen. Canning was a new and rarely used art. Beans, peas, lentils, dried fruits, and raisins were not packaged and had to be picked over by hand and washed, and the small bits of gravel removed before cooking. Usually all water for household purposes was carried into the house in a bucket from the backyard pump and with a long-handled tin dipper ladled out for drinking or cooking. Kerosene lamps had to be cleaned daily and filled, then wicks trimmed, and the globes polished. Water pitchers on bedroom washstands must be filled for use the next morning, for there were seldom bathroom or toilet facilities in the house. Once a week or oftener, the entire house was swept with a dampened broom, the kitchen floor scrubbed, and rugs hung on the clothesline and beaten with a stick or broom to remove the dust. Family washings were soaked and rubbed clean by hand on a washboard, rinsed, then run through a hand wringer or wrung by hand. When the clothes were hung on the line to dry, the weary housewife would empty the tubs, hang them on their respective nails of the back porch, ready for use again on bath day. She would then look wistfully at the clock, hoping for a 15-minute breathing spell before stoking the kitchen stove and preparing supper. Stephen provided the two Marys, Mary Haskell and Mary Chinnock, with a horse and buggy in which they might ride together and go shopping or visiting. We wonder whether he rode with them when he was at home on those occasional surprise visits that his wife told her friends about. When away, he faithfully wrote to her every week, and she returned the favor. Soon after its organization, the General Tract Society established a literature fund, sustained largely by gifts from the various state conferences. To this fund, all Adventists were invited to contribute. Through the years, it paid for thousands of packages of tracts and the required freight on all that were not carried to their destination free of charge by the obliging railroad companies. At seaports, ministers and laymen formed friendships with officers and sailors who then permitted packages of tracts and journals to be placed aboard ships bound for distant lands. The captains, though seldom interested in the contents of the packages, were usually willing to carry them free of charge, then toss them onto some wharf where their ship might anchor. There they lay until the foreign corresponding agent of the society or some other individual person or interested person picked them up and distributed them. While the vessels bearing these messengers of truth were weathering wind and tempest, the vigilant missionaries who had sent them forth were praying that angels would guide them to truth-hungry souls. Thus the printed pages often preceded the missionary. Every page was precious. Even outdated periodicals were bound in volumes and sent abroad. Haskell wrote to James and Ellen White, encouraging them with his own forecast that their writings would someday be read in many languages. He told of a captain on the Baltic Sea who was rejoicing in present truth through literature sent from America. He wrote, quote, "All labor, such as loading and unloading his ship, is laid aside on the Sabbath. And although the doctrines seem strange at the ports where he stops, he gathers the natives about him and gives them the reasons for his newfound faith." Back in the 1860s, when Elder Madison was preaching among the Scandinavian people in the United States, he felt so keenly the need of literature in their own language that he went into the review office and himself set type for our first Swedish tracts. As soon as the earliest of these were off the press, they were welcomed by the new Scandinavian believers in the States, then sent to friends and relatives in the homeland, thus acquainting them with the new truths they had acquired through Bible study. As fast as literature could be produced in French, German, Italian, Swedish, and other foreign languages, it was sent to the various countries of Europe. The Italian mission became a distributing center for the islands of the Mediterranean, with a club of Signs of the Times sent from America. A British tract and missionary society was organized in January 1880 and immediately began systematic distribution. Meanwhile, the South Lancaster Society was still active and growing. The following notice, typical of those times, appeared in the Review. The General Quarterly Meeting for the New England Tract Society, this is a quote, also its annual meeting will be held in South Lancaster, Massachusetts, commencing November 21 and continuing over the Monday following. Bring your straw ticks, buffalo robes, and bedding, and accommodations will be made for 300. From 1874, Haskell urged society members to sell periodical subscriptions with small books as a sideline or as premiums. George King, among others, worked thus several years before he persuaded his brethren to issue our first large doctrinal book, Daniel and the Revelation, especially for the colporteurs. 8 years after the first General Tract Society was organized, its field of operation had so greatly expanded that it was given a larger name. From 1882 on, its letterheads bore the title International Tract and Missionary Society. From time to time during the 80s, they carried the motto, Our mission is the world, or Christ died for all, and in smaller type, publications in Danish, Swedish, German, French, Spanish, and English, and listed publishing houses at Battle Creek, Michigan, Oakland, California, Grimsby, England, Basel, Switzerland, Christiania, Norway, and Melbourne, Australia. The name of Maria Huntley appears on the stationery as secretary and S.N. Haskell as president. Since its birth in 1874, the Tract Society, through its many branches, had sent out enormous quantities of truth-laden books, tracts, and pamphlets to lands far and near. In 1888, soon after its enlargement, the International Tract and Missionary Society placed 10,000 standard Seventh-day Adventist books in public libraries throughout the United States at a cost averaging more than $1 a volume, besides sending many bound books to English and Australian libraries. At the age of 10 years, Haskell's Child of Hope, the Tract Society, had reached a strong and vigorous maturity. Without waiting for the erection of a building, Haskell, I didn't turn that. We're in a new chapter. I turned 2 pages. The next chapter is called That New England School. The beginning of 1875 found Elder Haskell in Battle Creek. For days, Battle Creek's West End had been a scene of unusual activity. A ministerial institute was in progress, closing on January 3. The dedicatory exercises of the first Seventh-day Adventist College building were held the next morning, and several special evening meetings were held. But the blessing usually attending such an occasion seemed dampened by a spirit of criticism. As the ministers tramped back and forth between their lodgings and the Bible Institute class, there was whispering. Why this expensive outlay in building when all available funds are needed for the support of ministers who are proclaiming the message? Is this the time to launch a great educational program? Should young men be encouraged to spend time gaining a formal education when, without further training, they can put their talents to immediate use for the master. And so grew the spirit of dissatisfaction with the leaders. In one of the evening meetings during this time, Mrs. White addressed the assembly. She spoke emphatically regarding the necessity of the workers taking broader views of their God-given task. She dwelt upon the importance of laying much broader plans for the education of workers for evangelism both at home and abroad. She said that progress in sending workers to other lands was altogether too slow and inadequate. She told of a vision in which she had seen individuals and groups in various places searching their Bibles and praying for light, finding there the promise of Christ's return to redeem his people, and also discovering the truth regarding the sacredness of the seventh-day Sabbath. She saw small companies keeping the Sabbath of the Lord without knowing that there were any other Sabbath keepers in the world, and she stated that as the brethren heard of such companies, it would be their duty to send experienced ministers to labor among them and teach them the way of truth more fully. The publishing work was to be enlarged. She had been shown printing presses in other countries, she said, and if she should ever see them again, she would recognize them. Elder Haskell was deeply moved by her words, and long afterward related how vividly he remembered that meeting. He was sitting up front next to James White when White stood and interrupted her to ask a question. And he remembered her replying, "I am telling you what I have seen, and I have seen that there are fields all ready for the truth that we have not entered, and that and that have not been thought of, and that there were papers published in those fields." Again Brother White interrupted her. He said, "To what fields do you refer?" She said she could remember but one that the angel had mentioned, which was Australia. Now, Haskell's immediate duty lay in the preparation of missionaries for the broadening of the work. For their education and training, schools were needed. Public schools were succeeding admirably in preparing children and youth for citizenship in this world, but Adventist young people needed special training to prepare them for the work committed to them. During the following year, Haskell continued trying to interest students in attending Battle Creek College. All the while, a conviction was steadily deepening in his mind that the young people of the New England Conference should have their own training school where, nearer their homes and at less expense, they could prepare for missionary service. Okay, he spent time trying to interest students in attending Battle Creek College. All the while, a conviction was steadily deepening in his mind that the young people of the New England Conference should have their own training school. Oh, I already read that. Nearer their homes and at less expense. The thought was continually with him and was often expressed to his fellow workers. But there were difficulties. Where would the money come from? Could competent teachers be found? Such questions posed no obstacle to this man of faith. Were not all God's commands backed by his promises? His counsel was to step out by faith, trusting God to prosper his word. As the months went by, he continued talking praying and planning. He searched for competent teachers who would staff the school, and when he found two who he felt confident would adhere to the pattern of true education which God had given his church, he made the bold statement that the school would soon be opened. Without waiting for the erection of a building, Haskell rapidly completed plans for temporary quarters, and the opening day was set. Surprised readers saw the notice in the review. The school at South Lancaster opened today, April 19, with fair attendance. With characteristic optimism, the elder remarked that the number present was larger than expected and that others would doubtless join them later. In spite of that small beginning, April 19, 1882, was a banner day in the New England Conference. It marked the birthday of the South Lancaster Academy, now Atlantic Union College, which is now not operational. Maybe it is in a small way. An institution which, under the hand of God, has educated and trained hundreds of Seventh-day Adventist youth for Christian service, including some of the earliest pioneers to foreign lands. And now, on this opening morning of school, young people present looked around the room. They were in the little wagon repair shop, oh dear, that had served the church family 4 years as a chapel. Now that they have a newly erected church building, the shop is ready to be put to another use. It is rather small, only 18 by 24 feet, according to Elder Haskell's measuring stick. It has undergone a transformation and is already taking on the appearance of a schoolroom. A few charts and maps and 2 or 3 pictures hung on the walls. 15 or 20 desks have been gathered from here and there, including one larger than the others, which will be shared by 2 teachers. On the teacher's desk lie a few reference books, which, judging by their appearance, have already done good service in the field of education and are now waiting to be of further use. What is it that lends such an atmosphere of dignity and charm to the occasion? There is nothing imposing about the room or its furnishings. Rather, it lies in the group of founders assembled there, seated in front. Facing the happy students are 5 people: Elder Haskell, D.A. Robinson, pastor of the South Lancaster Church, and newly elected chairman of the school board, G.H. Bell, the recently appointed school principal, Maria Huntley, and Edith Sprague. Miss Sprague is a graduate of Battle Creek College and will assist Professor Bell in teaching. The clatter and chatter in the schoolroom dies down as Elder Haskell rises deliberately and begins speaking in his kind, fatherly way. He tells the young people that he knows they will appreciate the privilege of receiving instruction from experienced Christian teachers. You are fortunate, he says, in attending the school while it is yet small, because you will receive more individual attention than will be possible later, when a larger number of students will claim their teacher's time. You are greatly blessed in having Professor Goodloe Harper Bell as your principal. Professor Bell is recognized as one of the foremost educators in the state of Michigan. He gave up a lucrative teaching position to join the Seventh-day Adventists because he loves God and his special message for this time, and wants to see our young people receive the kind of education that will fit them to be good missionaries. It was Professor Bell, he continues, who started the little primary school in the outgrown Review and Herald office building, the school that, with the blessing of God, has grown into our dear Battle Creek College. For several years, he has been head of the English department of the college. Now he has come here to help us get our new school started in the right way. He knows how to teach. He can make any subject interesting. I wish I could do that. Any subject, especially that jawbreaker, grammar. And he loves young people. Haskell takes his seat and calls on Professor Bell to speak. The principal from Michigan shows himself to be truly great. He talks to these young people earnestly and carefully, as though he were addressing a university audience. He says to them, in substance, the education given in this school, we hope, will be of a more practical nature than that given in most schools of the land, because it will combine the development of physical, mental, and spiritual powers. He adds that any education which merely fills the student's mind with the mass of facts and hurries him through a course of study that he may obtain a diploma does not meet his mind as true education. True education not only trains the mind, he continues, it strengthens the character and reveals itself throughout life in the accomplishment of grand and noble work for the world. The aim of this school will be to train Christian workers. The Bible will be its foundation, and agriculture its ABC. In our study of science, we shall learn how the Word of God helps us better to understand the works of God. We shall bring into our literature classes only that which conforms to Christian principles. Physical labor will be combined with the study of books. Pastor Robinson then speaks a few words, followed by the two young women. Elder Haskell asks the students to make their own decision in regard to the plan of combined mental and physical labor and to make suggestions. By the end of this first school day, they are ready with a hearty response in a meeting called by the students themselves. Orville Farnsworth, one of the older boys, acts as chairman and presents to the students a few resolutions that he and his younger friends have drawn up. Quote, whereas a school has been opened in South Lancaster among SD Adventists, and whereas it has required sacrifice on the part of its founders to start the enterprise and will require still more to carry it on successfully. Therefore, resolved, 1, that we as students desire to show our appreciation of the efforts put forth in our behalf by doing all we can to build up this institution. 2, that we, the young men and boys of this school, request the school committee to provide us 1 acre of land for cultivation. 3, that we donate to the school the proceeds of all that shall be raised on said land. The girls have, end quote. The girls have also been in consultation and are now given a chance to present their resolutions. Resolved, that we, the young ladies of the South Lancaster School, feeling anxious to do our part in sustaining the same, will be responsible for the laundry work, and for all necessary repairs in the clothing of the young men who donate their time in cultivating land for the benefit of the school, and that we will be glad to help in any other way whenever opportunities present themselves. These resolutions are unanimously adopted, and an acre of land is at once reserved for cultivation by the young men. There had been a little pleasant rivalry between Elder Haskell and Elder William White as to which school, one in Massachusetts, the other in California, would be first to open. When Stephen Haskell read of the opening of Healdsburg College just 8 days in advance of his own little school in South Lancaster, he wrote his friend Willie, remarking gamely, "I had to build mine. Yours was already built." For over 4 months, Elder Haskell had been preparing to fulfill an assignment given him at the General Conference session in December of the previous year. He had been asked to visit the various missions in Europe. G.I. Butler, General Conference president, felt that it was important to have one of the leading brethren become acquainted with conditions in Europe in order to cooperate to the best advantage with the fellow workers overseas. And this starts something else. The educational system had begun in America, and now we're going to focus on the work overseas. And we'll stop here for now because it's close to closing time, and pick up next time, Lord willing. I want to thank each one of you for joining us, and we will close with prayer. Father, this hour seems to have gone by quickly, at least to me as I was reading, and I pray that you will help us individually to know just what you want us to do to advance your work on this earth. We want Jesus to come soon. We want him to come tomorrow, even if only we were ready. So help us to be ready, Father. We don't want sin to continue and cause misery and pain and unhappiness any longer. So, Father, cleanse our hearts. Give us the work you want us to do. Help us to understand it and help us to move forward in faith to accomplish it. Please bless our efforts. Bless our young people as they're studying your word, desiring to further your cause. And we do pray for workers, Lord. We need more consecrated workers so this work can go like a fire. But it takes workers, Lord. And as we look for these workers that you have in mind, we ask that you will also bless our truth-filled literature that we wish to share, not just Smyrna, but everywhere. Everywhere in your field, Lord, may literature also go forward to speak to hearts and minds. And I thank you. Bless us and keep us safe until we meet again. And thank you for each one who's been with us. In Jesus' name, amen. And until we meet again, may God bless and keep you and guide you. Bye for now.